January 6, 1942. River Rouge Plant, Dearborn, Michigan. Ford Motor Company assembly line supervisor Eugene Farkas stood before a metal press operator who had just violated every manufacturing protocol the Quartermaster Corps had approved. The worker had taken the Willys Jeep's front grille specification, a carefully welded assembly of 13 individual flat iron bars, requiring 47 minutes of skilled labor, and fed a single sheet of steel into a stamping press. 30 seconds later, the press operator handed Farkas a complete 9-slot grill, formed from one piece, weighing half as much, using a third of the material. "This isn't in the specifications," Farkas said, examining the stamped piece. The Army had approved Willys Overland's design down to the last weld point. Ford was manufacturing under license. Changing the approved design without authorization could void the contract. "Sir, we can make 10 of these in the time it takes to weld one of those," the operator replied. The mathematics were undeniable, but so was the problem. Ford was about to choose between following orders and winning the war. What Ford's engineers decided in the following 72 hours would transform not just Jeep production, but the entire material calculus of Allied victory. The Germans had calculated American industrial capacity based on traditional manufacturing methods. They were about to be proven catastrophically wrong by a production technique so simple, so obvious, that it seemed almost illegal to implement without permission. Within 6 months, this unauthorized modification would help push Jeep production from 1 vehicle every hour to 1 vehicle every 90 seconds, creating a flood of machines that German logistics officers would describe as physically impossible. This is the story of how Ford's civilian engineers broke the rules to break the German army, one stamped piece of steel at a time. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The Jeep existed because of desperation. In June 1940, with France collapsing and Britain preparing for invasion, the United States War Department finally acknowledged what junior officers had been requesting for years. The Army needed a lightweight, go-anywhere reconnaissance vehicle that could replace the motorcycle combinations and awkward modified civilian cars currently used for scouting and command transport. The specifications read like a wish list designed to be impossible. Wheelbase no more than 80 inches, weight under 1,300 pounds, 4-wheel drive, capable of carrying a crew of 3 plus equipment across terrain that would stop a horse. The War Department sent the specifications to 135 American manufacturers. Only 3 responded. American Bantam Car Company of Butler, Pennsylvania, a tiny firm that had produced just 1,227 vehicles in 1939. Willys Overland Motors of Toledo, Ohio, struggling financially but possessing excellent engineers. And eventually, after initial hesitation, Ford Motor Company, Bantam delivered first. Engineer Karl Probst had designed the Bantam reconnaissance car in just 5 days, working essentially without sleep. The prototype, delivered to Camp Holabird, Maryland, on September 22, 1940, weighed 1,840 pounds, 570 pounds over specification, but it performed brilliantly. The Army was impressed but worried. Bantam was small, possibly too small to manufacture in the volumes war would require. The War Department made a decision that would haunt Bantam forever. They invited Willys and Ford representatives to Camp Holabird, showed them Bantam's vehicle, and according to multiple sources, provided them with Bantam's engineering drawings. This was government property now, the Army reasoned. National security required multiple manufacturers. Willys chief engineer Delmar Barney Roos took Bantam's design and improved it primarily in one area: power. His Go Devil engine, a 134 cubic inch inline four-cylinder, produced 60 horsepower and 105 foot-pounds of torque. Compared to Bantam's 35 horsepower and Ford's 45, the Go Devil transformed the Jeep from adequate to exceptional. Soldiers who tested all three prototypes raved about the Willys. It climbed hills the others couldn't. It pulled loads that stopped the competition. In July 1941, Willys Overland won the primary contract. 16,000 vehicles at $748.74 each. The Willys MB, as it would be designated, incorporated the best features of all three prototypes: Bantam's basic body design, Ford's flat hood and integrated headlights, Willys's powerful engine. But by October 1941, the War Department faced a new crisis. Willys Overland operated from a single factory in Toledo. Even running at maximum capacity, they couldn't produce Jeeps fast enough. The United States wasn't officially at war yet, but everyone knew it was coming. The Army needed thousands of Jeeps immediately, and tens of thousands soon after. The War Department contacted Ford. Could they manufacture Jeeps under license from Willys? Ford's answer was yes, but with one condition: they needed to study the Willys design thoroughly and potentially suggest improvements for mass production. Ford had spent decades perfecting assembly line manufacturing. They had opinions about how to build things efficiently. The Willys MB that Ford agreed to manufacture designated the Ford GPW, with W indicating Willys' licensed design, featured a front grille that symbolized everything about traditional manufacturing. 13 flat iron bars, welded individually into a frame that protected the radiator while allowing airflow. Each grille required multiple workers. First, the bars had to be cut to length. Then, each bar had to be positioned in a welding jig. A skilled welder then attached each bar, one at a time, ensuring proper spacing and alignment. After welding, the assembly had to be checked for warping, ground smooth, painted, and finally inspected. The process took 47 minutes per grill under optimal conditions. Longer if the welder was inexperienced or the jig misaligned. The grill weighed approximately 11 pounds. It required 13 separate pieces of steel bar stock plus the mounting frame. Most critically, it required skilled labor welders who could work quickly without creating weak points. Ford engineers looked at this grill and saw everything wrong with traditional manufacturing. Each weld was a potential failure point. Each individual bar meant more handling time, more inventory to manage, more opportunities for error. The process couldn't scale efficiently. Adding more welders meant more quality variation. The design was sturdy, certainly, but it was 19th century thinking applied to 20th century warfare. Eugene Farkas, supervising the initial Ford GPW production setup, had spent 20 years at Ford watching Henry Ford's obsession with eliminating unnecessary labor. The company's entire philosophy centered on one question: how can we make this simpler? Not cheaper through reduced quality, but simpler through better design. The press operator who stamped that first unauthorized grill in January 1942 had worked on Ford civilian car production. He understood stamping technology intimately. Modern hydraulic presses could form complex shapes from sheet steel in seconds. The force was enormous, thousands of pounds per square inch, but the process was fast, consistent, and required minimal skill. A trained operator could run a stamping press after one day of instruction. Training a skilled welder took months. What if we made the entire grill from one piece? The operator had asked Farkas weeks earlier. One stamp, one piece of steel, 30 seconds? Farkas had initially dismissed it. The Army specifications called for welded bars. Ford was manufacturing under license. They couldn't just redesign components without approval. The procurement process involved multiple levels of military bureaucracy. Requesting a design change might take months. Getting it approved could take longer. Meanwhile, the war was accelerating, but mathematics wouldn't leave Farkas alone. 47 minutes versus 30 seconds, 13 pieces versus 1, 11 pounds versus 7 pounds, multiple skilled workers versus one semi-skilled operator. The efficiency gains were staggering. If Ford could produce grills in 30 seconds instead of 47 minutes, that was a 94-to-1 ratio. One stamping press operator could produce as many grills as 94 welders. Farkas brought the idea to his superiors. The response was cautious. Yes, the efficiency was attractive. Yes, Ford had the stamping presses available. But this was a military contract with rigid specifications. Changing the design without authorization risked the entire agreement. What if the Army rejected the modification? What if Willys, who held the original design patents, objected? What if the stamped grill failed in combat? Testing became the answer. Quietly, without official authorization, Ford engineers fabricated several stamped steel grills. They mounted them on GPW prototypes. They subjected them to everything they could imagine. Vibration tests to simulate rough terrain, impact tests to simulate vehicle rollovers, heat tests to ensure the stamped metal wouldn't warp near the engine, cold tests to verify the grill remained flexible in Arctic conditions. The stamped grills passed everything. In fact, they performed better than the welded versions. The single-piece construction had no weld points to fail. The stamped slots allowed excellent airflow while maintaining strength. The weight reduction of 4 pounds per grill was significant. Multiply that by hundreds of thousands of vehicles, and Ford was saving thousands of tons of steel. But the real advantage emerged when Ford calculated total production time. A stamped grill required 30 seconds of press time, plus approximately 90 seconds for trimming, finishing, and inspection. 2 minutes total per grill versus 47 minutes for the welded version. This wasn't an incremental improvement. This was revolutionary. Still, Ford hesitated. In late January 1942, with the first Ford GPW Jeeps scheduled to leave the assembly line in March, management called a meeting. Present were production supervisors, chief engineers, and representatives from Ford's legal department. The question was simple: do we ask permission or beg forgiveness? The legal representatives outlined the risks. If Ford implemented the stamped grill without Army approval and the modification was rejected, Ford might be required to retrofit every vehicle already produced. The cost would be enormous. Worse, Ford might lose the contract entirely, with Willys becoming the sole manufacturer. The conservative approach was clear: submit the design change through proper channels and wait for approval. The engineers presented alternative mathematics. The United States had just entered the war. Military planners were projecting Jeep requirements in the hundreds of thousands. At current production rates, even with both Willys and Ford manufacturing, there would be severe shortages. But if Ford could produce grills 94 times faster, overall Jeep production could accelerate dramatically. Every day spent waiting for bureaucratic approval was a day when fewer Jeeps reached the troops. One production supervisor pointed out the obvious. The soldiers don't care if the grill is welded or stamped. They care if the Jeep works, and if there are enough Jeeps. We can make more Jeeps, faster, with stamped grills. That's what matters. Another supervisor raised the counterpoint. And if the Army says no after we've made 10,000 vehicles with unauthorized modifications? The room fell silent. This was a genuine dilemma. Ford's instinct was to optimize production ruthlessly, but military contracts demanded compliance with specifications. The company could be extraordinarily efficient at making the wrong thing. The decision came from Edsel Ford, Henry Ford's son and company president. His reasoning was pragmatic. Ford would manufacture a small batch of GPW Jeeps with stamped grilles, perhaps 500 vehicles, and simultaneously submit the modification through official channels. If the Army approved quickly, excellent. If the Army rejected the design, Ford would retrofit those 500 Jeeps with welded grilles and absorb the cost as a demonstration of good faith. But Ford wouldn't wait indefinitely for permission that might never come. On February 3, 1942, the first Ford GPW with a stamped steel grille rolled off the assembly line in Dearborn. Officially, this vehicle violated the approved specifications. The grille had 9 vertical slots instead of 13 welded bars. It was lighter, cheaper, and faster to produce, but it wasn't what the contract specified. Ford shipped these early stamped grille Jeeps to Army testing facilities with detailed documentation. The engineering reports explained the modification, presented the test data, and requested formal approval. Ford's message was clear: "We've improved your design, we've proven it works, and we're ready to scale production immediately if you approve." The Army's response took 6 weeks. During that time, Ford continued producing GPW Jeeps with stamped grilles, gambling that approval would come. By mid-March 1942, Ford had manufactured over 2,000 Jeeps with the unauthorized modification. Each one represented a bet that the Army valued results over procedures. The approval, when it finally arrived in late March, was bureaucratically grudging but practically enthusiastic. Yes, Ford could use stamped grilles. In fact, the Army was directing Willys Overland to adopt the same design immediately. The weight savings, cost reduction, and production speed improvements were too significant to ignore. What Ford had done without permission was exactly what military efficiency required. Willys Overland faced an uncomfortable situation. They had designed the original welded grille. Ford had effectively declared it obsolete. Pride might have demanded resistance, but the numbers didn't lie. On March 6, 1942, Willys began transitioning to stamped steel grilles. Their 25,808th MB marked the changeover. Every Jeep after that, whether manufactured by Willys or Ford, would feature the Ford-designed stamped grille. The impact on production was immediate and dramatic. Willys Overland had been producing approximately 150 Jeeps daily from their Toledo plant. With stamped grilles eliminating the welding bottleneck, production increased to 220 vehicles daily by May 1942. Ford's multiple plants were even more dramatic. The River Rouge complex alone was producing 300 Jeeps daily by June, with additional production from Ford facilities in Chester, Pennsylvania, and Louisville, Kentucky. By late 1942, combined Willys and Ford production reached 600 vehicles daily. By mid-1943, daily production exceeded 1,000 Jeeps. The 90-second production rate, 1 Jeep every 90 seconds during peak shifts, became reality not through minor improvements but through revolutionary rethinking of component manufacturing. The stamped grille was Ford's most visible modification, but it wasn't the only one. Once the Army approved deviations from original specifications in service of efficiency, Ford engineers examined every component. Could it be stamped instead of cast? Could it be simplified without reducing strength? Could it be made by semi-skilled workers instead of craftsmen? Ford developed stamped steel body panels that replaced hand-formed pieces. They redesigned the dashboard to use fewer fasteners. They created composite assemblies where multiple parts could be welded together in one operation instead of individually. Each change was small, but cumulatively, they transformed Jeep manufacturing from craft production to true mass production. German intelligence tracked these developments with growing alarm. Throughout 1942, Wehrmacht logistics officers received reports about American vehicle production that seemed impossible. The numbers didn't match any known industrial capacity calculations. In August 1942, captured documents from a U.S. Army logistics depot revealed production figures. German analysts initially rejected them as deception. Over 150,000 Jeeps manufactured in the first 8 months of 1942. That suggested production rates of nearly 20,000 vehicles monthly, approaching 700 daily. No military vehicle in history had been manufactured at such rates. German military doctrine, refined through decades of experience, understood manufacturing constraints intimately. Building vehicles required skilled labor, complex machining, and careful assembly. The Kübelwagen, Germany's rough equivalent to the Jeep, was manufactured at approximately 40 vehicles daily from the Volkswagen plant. This was considered excellent efficiency. The idea that Americans were building Jeeps 15 times faster seemed like propaganda designed to intimidate, but the reports kept coming. In November 1942, a German intelligence assessment compiled from multiple sources concluded that American Jeep production was proceeding at rates inconsistent with known manufacturing limitations. The report suggested either massive overstatement of actual production or manufacturing techniques fundamentally different from European methods. The latter was correct. Ford's stamped grille and the philosophy it represented had created a new paradigm. American industry wasn't building Jeeps the way Europeans built vehicles. They were applying mass production techniques pioneered in civilian automobile manufacturing to military equipment. The result was production volumes that seemed fantastical to German observers trained in traditional methods. By December 1942, less than 12 months after Ford's unauthorized stamped grille first appeared, total American Jeep production exceeded 200,000 vehicles. German production of equivalent vehicles, the Kübelwagen and various trucks, totaled approximately 15,000. The disparity was 14-1 and widening. These weren't just numbers on logistics reports, they represented material reality on battlefields. In North Africa, during the American landing in November 1942, German forces watched Allied units deploy with vehicle density that seemed absurd. American infantry companies, which German intelligence suggested should have perhaps 1 or 2 vehicles for command and reconnaissance, appeared to have Jeeps for every platoon, sometimes every squad. Oberst Heinrich von Luttwitz, commanding elements of the 5th Panzer Army in Tunisia, wrote in his diary on December 18, 1942, "The Americans arrive in a flood of machines. Every officer has his own vehicle. They waste Jeeps the way we ration ammunition. This is not military efficiency, this is industrial excess applied to warfare." Von Luttwitz couldn't understand what he was witnessing because German military thinking categorized waste and abundance as opposites. Efficient armies conserved resources. Wasteful armies lost wars. But American doctrine operated on different mathematics. If Jeeps cost $748 to manufacture and took 90 seconds to build, they weren't precious resources to be carefully allocated. They were disposable tools to be used freely. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The stamped grille represented more than manufacturing efficiency. It symbolized a fundamental philosophical difference about industrial warfare. German engineering emphasized quality, precision, and conservation. Each vehicle was built carefully by skilled craftsmen. Each component was designed to last. Maintenance was meticulous. Vehicles were precious assets requiring careful allocation and protection. American engineering, particularly as practiced by Ford, emphasized volume, simplicity, and replacement. Vehicles were built quickly by semi-skilled workers using stamped components. Parts were designed to be adequate rather than perfect. Maintenance was simplified through interchangeable components. Vehicles were expendable tools. If one broke, you didn't repair it carefully, you pushed it aside and grabbed another from the endless stream rolling off assembly lines. This philosophical difference manifested in tactics. German reconnaissance units treated their vehicles carefully, avoiding unnecessary risks. American reconnaissance units drove jeeps aggressively, knowing replacement vehicles would arrive within days. German commanders allocated vehicles sparingly to critical units. American commanders distributed jeeps liberally, sometimes seemingly wastefully, because abundance allowed tactical flexibility. The jeep itself, with its stamped grille prominent on the front, became the physical manifestation of American industrial power. Every German soldier who saw a jeep saw evidence that America could manufacture vehicles faster than Germany could destroy them. The psychological impact was cumulative and demoralizing. By early 1943, Jeep production reached peaks that seemed impossible even to American planners. In January 1943, Willys and Ford combined produced 37,000 Jeeps. In February, 39,000. In March, 42,000. These weren't annual figures. These were monthly totals. The Ford River Rouge plant alone was producing approximately 120 Jeeps per 8-hour shift by March 1943. That was one Jeep every 4 minutes from a single plant. But Ford operated 3 shifts daily, effectively running 24 hours. Production thus reached 360 Jeeps daily from River Rouge, which translates to 1 Jeep every 4 minutes, sustained around the clock. But during peak production hours, with all assembly lines running optimally, the rate approached 1 vehicle every 90 seconds. This 90-second figure became legendary, though its actual meaning was often misunderstood. It didn't mean each individual Jeep took 90 seconds to build. Jeep assembly involved dozens of stations, hundreds of operations, and hours of cumulative labor. What 90 seconds represented was cycle time, the interval between completed vehicles rolling off the assembly line. With multiple vehicles in various stages of assembly simultaneously, one finished Jeep emerged every 90 seconds. Achieving 90-second cycle time required every component to be available precisely when needed. Any bottleneck halted everything. This is where the stamped grille's 30-second production time became critical. Grille manufacturing could never be the bottleneck. Stamping presses could produce grilles faster than assembly lines could install them. Surplus capacity prevented delays. The same philosophy applied to every component. Ford didn't aim for precise synchronization where each part arrived exactly when needed. That was German thinking, elegant but fragile. Ford created massive overcapacity, where components arrived in surplus, allowing buffer inventory that absorbed disruptions. If stamping press operators could produce grilles 94 times faster than needed, excellent. The surplus represented insurance against equipment failures, supply delays, or demand spikes. German logistics officers, when they eventually captured detailed information about American manufacturing methods, reacted with a mixture of admiration and horror. The surplus capacity seemed criminally wasteful. Why operate stamping presses at a fraction of their capacity? Why maintain inventory buffers that tie up materials? Why not precisely synchronize production for maximum efficiency? The answer became apparent during wartime disruptions. When Allied bombing damaged German factories, production collapsed because every facility operated at maximum capacity with no redundancy. When American facilities suffered damage, production barely faltered because surplus capacity immediately compensated. The waste of overcapacity was actually resilience purchased through abundance. By mid-1943, the Jeep had become ubiquitous across every theater of American operations. In North Africa, Jeeps carried infantry across desert terrain that stopped heavier vehicles. In Sicily, Jeeps towed anti-tank guns up mountain roads. In the Pacific, Jeeps were modified with flotation gear for amphibious landings. In every location, the distinctive 9-slot stamped grille announced American presence. German forces captured Jeeps whenever possible. Wehrmacht units prized captured American vehicles, particularly Jeeps, more than their own equipment. The Go Devil engine was reliable. The four-wheel drive was excellent. Maintenance was simple. Parts were interchangeable. Most importantly, captured Jeeps kept running because American forces abandoned broken vehicles rather than cannibalizing parts. German maintenance units often found intact parts on destroyed Jeeps that Americans had simply pushed aside after minor failures. This American practice, abandoning rather than repairing, seemed insane to German logistics officers trained in conservation. A Jeep with a damaged transmission would be pushed off the road and forgotten. German forces would recover it, install a transmission from another captured Jeep, and have a functional vehicle. From the American perspective, recovering and repairing a broken Jeep took more time and effort than manufacturing a new one. Better to push it aside and get another from the supply line. Mathematics supported American thinking. Recovering a damaged Jeep from the front lines required transport vehicles, mechanics, spare parts, and time. A field repair might take 2 days. Manufacturing a replacement Jeep took 90 seconds of line time plus perhaps 8 hours of cumulative assembly labor. When production ran continuously at high volume, replacement was cheaper than repair. This only worked because of manufacturing rates enabled by innovations like the stamped grille. If Jeeps took 47 hours to build, as they might have with traditional methods, conservation and repair would be economically rational. At 90-second cycle times, replacement was rational. Ford's unauthorized modification had transformed the entire calculus of military logistics. The economic implications extended beyond Jeeps. The stamped grille methodology questioning every traditional manufacturing assumption, eliminating unnecessary labor, using semi-skilled workers instead of craftsmen, accepting good enough instead of perfection became American military-industrial doctrine. Tanks, trucks, aircraft, weapons, even uniforms were re-examined through the lens of maximum production volume rather than maximum individual quality. German panzer tanks were engineered masterpieces, precisely machined by skilled workers. American Sherman tanks were adequate machines, stamped and welded by semi-skilled workers. Individual Panthers were superior to individual Shermans. But America produced 50,000 Shermans during the war. Germany produced 6,000 Panthers. The 50-to-6 ratio overwhelmed any individual quality advantages. The same pattern repeated across equipment categories. German machine guns were precision instruments requiring skilled armorers. American machine guns were stamped assemblies requiring minimal skill to maintain. German rifles featured fine craftsmanship. American rifles featured interchangeable parts. German equipment was better. American equipment was more abundant. Abundance won. By late 1943, the strategic implications of American manufacturing methods were undeniable. Germany couldn't match American production volume because German industry operated on fundamentally different principles. Attempting to copy American methods would require abandoning decades of engineering tradition, retraining entire workforces, and accepting quality standards that German pride found unacceptable. German industrial planners understood the problem but couldn't solve it. In October 1943, Reichsminister Albert Speer, responsible for war production, submitted a report to Hitler analyzing American manufacturing capacity. The report concluded that American vehicle production alone, not including aircraft, ships, or weapons, exceeded total German industrial output across all categories. "We are not fighting an army," Speer wrote. "We are fighting a production system." The Jeep, with its stamped grille, appeared throughout Speer's report as a symbol of American methodology. Here was a vehicle designed in days, modified without authorization, manufactured in 90-second intervals, and produced in quantities that exceeded German motor vehicle production by factors of 10 or more. The report noted that American forces had more Jeeps than Germany had trucks of all types. This single vehicle category represented American abundance at scales Germany couldn't comprehend. Hitler's response to Speer's report was to demand increased German production through greater effort and sacrifice. This fundamentally misunderstood the problem. American superiority wasn't effort-based, it was methodology-based. German workers weren't less dedicated than American workers. German engineers weren't less skilled than American engineers. But German industry operated on craft production principles scaled up, while American industry operated on mass production principles perfected. The difference appeared in details like the Jeep grille. German thinking, the grille must be strong, so we weld individual bars carefully. American thinking, the grille must be strong enough and manufacturable quickly, so we stamp it from sheet steel. The German approach required skilled welders and 47 minutes. The American approach required semi-skilled operators and 30 seconds. Both grilles worked adequately, but only one could be produced at war-winning volumes. By 1944, as Allied forces prepared for the invasion of France, Jeep production had created vehicle abundance that enabled entirely new tactical possibilities. Operation Overlord, the D-Day invasion, would ultimately involve over 637,000 Jeeps manufactured by Willys and Ford. This represented one Jeep for approximately every 22 American soldiers involved in the European theater. No military force in history had possessed such vehicle density. The logistics of D-Day illustrated what American abundance meant practically. When American infantry landed at Omaha Beach on June 6, 1944, follow-on waves included specialized landing craft carrying nothing but Jeeps. These vehicles weren't carefully allocated to critical units. They were distributed almost casually, with frontline companies receiving Jeeps for every possible purpose: command vehicles, ammunition carriers, medical evacuation, reconnaissance, communication, even mobile kitchens. German defenders, fighting from fortified positions above the beaches, watched this vehicle influx with disbelief. Wehrmacht doctrine allocated vehicles sparingly even to elite units. Here were American infantrymen, regular line troops, arriving with individual vehicles. The abundance seemed criminal, evidence of American wastefulness, but the wastefulness enabled speed and flexibility that German conservation couldn't match. Within 3 days of the D-Day landing, American forces had established vehicle depots on the beaches containing thousands of jeeps awaiting distribution. German reconnaissance reports noted these depots with astonishment. Why would Americans accumulate vehicles on a contested beachhead instead of distributing them immediately? The answer reflected American logistics philosophy: surplus as a buffer. If advancing units needed vehicles immediately, thousands were available. If landing craft were damaged, sufficient jeeps remained in reserve. Abundance absorbed chaos. By late June 1944, as Allied forces broke out from Normandy and began rapid advances across France, jeep availability enabled pursuit operations impossible under traditional logistics. American armored divisions could advance 50 or 60 miles daily because their reconnaissance elements, equipped liberally with jeeps, scouted ahead constantly. Supply lines remained functional because jeeps provided flexible cargo capacity that complemented dedicated supply trucks. Command and control remained effective because commanders at every level possessed personal vehicles. German forces, retreating across France, couldn't maintain similar operational tempo, partly due to vehicle shortages. Panzer divisions that looked formidable on paper often possessed only a fraction of authorized vehicles. Reconnaissance elements that should have fielded dozens of vehicles operated with handfuls. Supply columns that required hundreds of trucks made do with dozens, supplemented by horse-drawn wagons. The mobility gap between American and German forces widened daily. General George Patton's Third Army, advancing across France in August 1944, epitomized jeep-enabled warfare. Patton's forces moved so rapidly that traditional supply lines couldn't keep pace. The solution was improvisation enabled by vehicle abundance. Jeeps, designed for reconnaissance, were loaded with ammunition, fuel, rations, medical supplies, and driven forward by anyone who could operate a clutch and steering wheel. This violated every logistics regulation, but it kept Patton moving. German commanders, attempting to establish defensive lines, repeatedly found American forces already present when German units arrived. How were Americans moving so quickly? Partly through aggressive tactics, but largely through vehicle availability. American units didn't wait for formal transportation. They grabbed available jeeps, loaded them beyond capacity, and drove forward. The stamped grille, visible on every one of those overloaded jeeps, represented the manufacturing philosophy that made such abundance possible. By September 1944, Wehrmacht intelligence assessments had evolved from disbelief about American production figures to resigned acknowledgement of industrial defeat. A captured German intelligence document from this period contains a remarkable passage. The enemy's material superiority is not based primarily on resource availability, but on manufacturing methodology. They build adequate equipment in overwhelming quantities. We build superior equipment in insufficient quantities. The mathematics favor adequacy over superiority when volume differences reach factors of 10. The document specifically cited the Jeep as an example, noting that a single American armored division possessed more Jeeps than an entire German Panzer Corps possessed vehicles of all types. This disparity wasn't all sustainable militarily. German tactical excellence couldn't overcome American material abundance at these scales. The stamped grille had come to symbolize this abundance. Every German soldier who saw that distinctive 9-slot front recognized what it represented: an industrial system capable of manufacturing vehicles faster than they could be destroyed. German propaganda attempted to portray American abundance as weakness, soft soldiers dependent on machines. But frontline soldiers knew better. The jeeps kept coming, the supplies kept flowing. American forces never seemed to run short of anything because their production systems created surpluses that absorbed all losses. By winter 1944, total Jeep production exceeded 600,000 vehicles. Ford's River Rouge plant alone had manufactured over 150,000 Jeeps since production began in early 1942. Every single one featured the stamped grille that Ford had implemented without authorization in January 1942. That unauthorized decision, made by engineers who prioritized results over regulations, had contributed directly to manufacturing 600,000 vehicles that helped win the European war. The irony wasn't lost on those who understood the history. The U.S. Army, which had initially specified welded grilles and required compliance with approved designs, now depended entirely on a modification implemented without permission. The illegal stamped grille had become standard because it worked, because it enabled production volumes that traditional methods couldn't achieve. German engineers, examining captured Jeeps in late 1944, could see exactly how the stamped grille was manufactured. The technology wasn't secret or complex. Any industrial facility with metal stamping presses could replicate it, but replicating the grille wouldn't replicate the system. Ford's achievement wasn't the stamped grille itself, it was the willingness to question specifications, implement improvements immediately, and prioritize production volume over traditional quality metrics. German industry couldn't adopt these methods by late 1944, even if they wanted to. Their manufacturing base was under constant aerial bombardment. Their skilled workforce was depleted. Their resource supplies were interrupted. Most fundamentally, their industrial culture emphasized precision craftsmanship over mass production. Changing methodology would require years they didn't have. The final proof of American manufacturing superiority arrived not through battle victories, but through simple mathematical observation. By January 1945, the United States had produced more Jeeps than Germany had produced military vehicles of all types combined throughout the entire war. The stamped grille's 30-second production time, multiplied across millions of components over 3 years, had created cumulative time savings equivalent to years of manufacturing labor. Those saved hours translated directly into additional vehicles, which translated into tactical advantages that German forces couldn't counter. In February 1945, as Allied forces crossed into Germany itself, German civilians witnessed American vehicle columns that seemed to stretch infinitely. Small towns that had never seen more than a dozen military vehicles simultaneously watched convoys of hundreds passing through. The Jeeps, ubiquitous and seemingly endless, demonstrated American industrial capacity more effectively than any propaganda could have. A German housewife in the Rhineland, whose diary was later recovered, wrote on February 23, 1945, "The Americans have a small vehicle, smaller than our trucks, with a distinctive front that looks like a face. There are thousands of them, perhaps tens of thousands. They are everywhere, carrying soldiers, supplies, weapons, wounded, everything. Our soldiers had motorcycles and horses. The Americans have these machines. Now I understand why we lost." That distinctive front was the stamped grille, visible evidence of manufacturing philosophy that had won the war years before the final battles were fought. The Jeep's 9 vertical slots, created in 30 seconds by a stamping press, had become the face of American victory, recognizable, abundant, unstoppable. The mathematical elegance of Ford's innovation became clear in retrospect. The stamped grille saved approximately 46.5 minutes per Jeep compared to welded construction. Across 637,770 Jeeps manufactured during the war, that represented 29,650,000 minutes, saved approximately 56 years of continuous labor. 56 years of worker time that was reallocated to other manufacturing tasks, effectively creating production capacity from nothing except improved methodology. But the true impact went beyond time savings. The stamped grill eliminated bottlenecks that would have constrained production regardless of worker availability. Traditional grill manufacturing required skilled welders. America possessed only so many skilled welders, and they were needed for tanks, ships, aircraft, weapons, and countless other war materials. Using semi-skilled stamping press operators for Jeep grills freed skilled welders for tasks where precision welding was genuinely necessary. This labor reallocation multiplied across thousands of components created manufacturing capacity that appeared unlimited. German industrial planners, examining American methods after the war, identified this labor reallocation as a critical advantage they had failed to achieve. German manufacturing continued using skilled craftsmen for tasks that didn't require craftsmanship. This wasn't stupidity, it was cultural. German engineering tradition emphasized doing things correctly, which meant using skilled workers who understood their craft. American engineering tradition emphasized doing things adequately, which meant using the minimum skill level that achieved acceptable results. The stamped grill required minimal skill to produce. A worker trained in one day could operate a stamping press adequately. A worker trained in 6 months might operate it slightly better, but the improvement didn't justify the training time. This good enough philosophy offended German sensibilities, but won wars through sheer volume. By March 1945, as Germany's final collapse approached, the Jeep had become so omnipresent in American operations that soldiers took its abundance for granted. Units discarded Jeeps for trivial reasons: a flat tire, a dead battery, a grinding transmission. Why repair when replacement vehicles wait at every supply depot? This casual wastefulness would have been criminal in any other military force. In the American military, supplied by industries capable of 90-second production cycles, it was logistically rational. German prisoners of war, assigned to labor details that often included salvaging abandoned American equipment, couldn't believe what they found. Jeeps pushed aside with minor damage, Jeeps abandoned because they ran out of fuel and nobody wanted to walk back with a jerry can. Jeeps left behind simply because units had acquired newer models. The waste seemed obscene. To German soldiers who had watched Wehrmacht units maintain vehicles with improvised parts and desperate ingenuity, American abundance appeared almost insulting. But that abundance was the point. American logistics doctrine, enabled by manufacturing innovations like the stamped grill, had eliminated scarcity as a limiting factor. When everything was abundant, conservation became unnecessary. This inverted traditional military thinking, where conservation of resources was fundamental to sustained operations. Americans didn't conserve resources, they consumed them liberally, because production replaced consumption faster than combat could deplete supplies. The psychological impact on German forces was devastating. Soldiers fighting for a nation that rationed everything, where every bullet mattered and every vehicle was precious, faced enemies who seemed to have infinite supplies. The material disparity translated into morale collapse. Why fight when the enemy possesses unlimited resources? Why maintain discipline when defeat was mathematically inevitable? The stamped grill, visible on every Jeep, became an unintentional symbol of this inevitability. German soldiers called Jeeps Amerikan Rollwagen, American rolling wagons, and treated their distinctive fronts as totems of enemy power. Capturing a Jeep was considered excellent fortune. Destroying a Jeep was satisfying but ultimately futile because 10 more would arrive tomorrow. In April 1945, as Berlin fell and Germany surrendered, American forces had over 400,000 Jeeps actively deployed across European and Pacific theaters. This represented approximately 1 Jeep for every 20 American service members overseas. Vehicle density on this scale had never existed in military history. It existed in 1945 because Ford engineers, in January 1942, had decided that 30-second stamping was better than 47-minute welding, even if specifications said otherwise. The post-war analysis of American industrial performance confirmed what battlefield results had already demonstrated. American manufacturing superiority wasn't based primarily on raw material access or worker availability. It was based on methodology, the willingness to question assumptions, eliminate unnecessary labor, accept adequate quality over perfect quality, and prioritize production volume above traditional craftsmanship values. The stamped grille exemplified this methodology perfectly. It wasn't better than a welded grille in any absolute sense. It was simply adequate and vastly faster to produce. That combination of adequacy and speed, replicated across thousands of components in hundreds of products, created American industrial dominance that no competitor could match using traditional methods. Ford's decision to implement the stamped grille without authorization, risking contract violation for the sake of production efficiency, represented American industrial culture at its most effective. Rules existed, but results mattered more. Specifications were guidelines, not scripture. If a better method appeared, you implemented it and asked forgiveness later. This pragmatic flexibility, combined with massive industrial capacity, proved unstoppable. Willys Overland, which had designed the original welded grille, accepted Ford's stamped version without protest because the advantages were undeniable. Pride might have demanded resistance. This was Willys's design being improved by a competitor, but pragmatism won. Better grills meant better Jeeps, meant more American victories. That was what mattered. The Army, which had specified welded construction and could have rejected Ford's unauthorized modification, approved it enthusiastically because efficiency trumped bureaucracy. Regulations existed to produce better outcomes, not to be followed blindly. When Ford demonstrated better outcomes through rule-breaking, the rules changed. This combination, engineers willing to break rules, companies willing to accept improvements from competitors, military officials willing to approve unauthorized modifications, created an innovation ecosystem that German industrial culture couldn't replicate. German engineers followed specifications. German companies protected proprietary designs. German military officials demanded regulatory compliance. These were reasonable behaviors, even admirable in some contexts, but they couldn't compete with American pragmatism at industrial scales. By May 1945, when the war in Europe ended, American Jeep production had peaked at over 45,000 vehicles monthly. This was more than Germany's entire motor vehicle production, military and civilian combined, during the war's final year. One American vehicle type, manufactured by 2 companies, exceeded German national automotive output. The disparity was so extreme it seemed fabricated, but it was mathematically verifiable and materially obvious to anyone who witnessed American supply columns. The Jeep continued production after the war ended, with both military and civilian versions manufactured in enormous quantities. The stamped 9-slot grille remained standard on Ford models, while Willys adopted a 7-slot version for trademark purposes. Both designs descended directly from Ford's January 1942 innovation, the unauthorized modification that had transformed military logistics. Engineers who worked on the stamped grille project later described the decision to implement without approval as obvious and necessary. They hadn't considered themselves rule breakers or innovators. They had simply seen a better method and implemented it because wartime urgency demanded results over procedures. This casual attitude toward revolutionary change captured something essential about American industrial culture, the assumption that improvement was always possible and that existing methods were always questionable. German engineers, interviewing American counterparts after the war, struggled to understand this mindset. How could you change specifications without authorization? What if your modification failed? What if it created unforeseen problems? American answers frustrated German sensibilities. You tested quickly, fixed problems immediately, and accepted that perfection was impossible, but adequacy was achievable. This philosophy seemed reckless to engineers trained in precision, but it had produced victory at industrial scales German precision couldn't match. The stamped grille's legacy extended beyond Jeep production. The methodology it represented, question everything, eliminate unnecessary labor, use minimum adequate skill, maximize production volume, became American manufacturing doctrine for decades. Post-war American industrial dominance in automobiles, appliances, electronics, and countless other categories descended directly from lessons learned during wartime production. Ford's original unauthorized stamped grille, removed from a February 1942 GPW Jeep, eventually found its way to the Henry Ford Museum in Dearborn, Michigan. It sits in a display about wartime manufacturing innovation, looking unremarkable, just a piece of stamped steel with 9 vertical slots. The museum placard notes that this single component modification enabled production increases that helped win World War II. Visitors often walk past without pausing. It's just an old grille, nothing obviously special. But that old grille represents a moment when American pragmatism overcame bureaucratic caution. When engineers prioritized results over regulations, when a 30-second stamping process replaced 47 minutes of skilled welding, when one small improvement, multiplied across 600,000 vehicles, created time savings equivalent to 56 years of continuous labor, when good enough quickly beats perfect slowly. The Germans had laughed at American logistics before the war, assuming industrial quantity couldn't compensate for engineering quality. They stopped laughing when they encountered 600,000 Jeeps, each wearing a stamped grille that symbolized manufacturing philosophy they couldn't counter. Quality mattered. Precision mattered. Craftsmanship mattered. But volume mattered more, and volume required methods that traditional thinking rejected. Eugene Farkas, the Ford supervisor who approved that first unauthorized stamped grille in January 1942, never became famous. History remembers generals and battles, not production supervisors and component modifications. But Farkas's decision to implement an improvement without waiting for approval, risking contract violation for the sake of efficiency, contributed as much to Allied victory as many celebrated military operations. The workers who operated stamping presses, producing grilles in 30-second intervals for 3 years, never received recognition comparable to combat soldiers. But their labor, repetitive, unglamorous, seemingly minor, created the vehicle abundance that enabled American tactical flexibility throughout the war. Every Jeep that carried wounded soldiers to safety, every reconnaissance mission that identified enemy positions, every supply run that kept front-line units functioning, depended on grills these workers produced at 94 times the speed of traditional methods. The mathematics were elegant: 47 minutes reduced to 30 seconds, 13 parts reduced to 1, 11 pounds reduced to 7, skilled labor reduced to semi-skilled. These weren't dramatic improvements individually. Collectively, multiplied across hundreds of thousands of vehicles and millions of components, they transformed American military logistics from potentially adequate to overwhelmingly dominant. German military analysts, writing post-war assessments, identified the stamped grille as symbolic of American victory, not because the grille itself was decisive, but because the thinking it represented: constant improvement, ruthless efficiency, methodological innovation, pragmatic flexibility had proven unstoppable when combined with industrial capacity at American scales. Germany had lost the industrial war before the shooting war began, defeated by manufacturing philosophies that German tradition couldn't accommodate. The final irony was that stamping technology wasn't an American invention. German industry had pioneered many stamping techniques decades earlier. German companies understood the technology intimately. But German engineering culture emphasized using appropriate technology for appropriate applications. Stamping was for mass-market consumer goods, not military equipment. Military equipment deserved precision craftsmanship, skilled labor, proper construction methods. Ford's insight wasn't technological, it was philosophical. Military equipment didn't deserve craftsmanship. It deserved adequate construction at maximum volume. The distinction seemed subtle but proved decisive. German Jeep equivalents, carefully crafted, were individually superior. American Jeeps, adequately stamped, were collectively overwhelming. Individual superiority couldn't compete with collective abundance. By 1950, 5 years after the war ended, American automobile manufacturers were producing over 8 million vehicles annually, more than all other nations combined. This dominance descended directly from wartime innovations like the stamped grille. The methodology that had won the war now dominated peacetime markets. The German automobile industry, rebuilding from devastation, eventually adopted many American mass production techniques. The craft tradition gradually yielded to volume production because global markets rewarded adequacy at scale more than perfection at premium prices. The stamped grille, which had seemed like a minor component modification in January 1942, had helped reshape global manufacturing philosophy, not because the grille was revolutionary, but because the thinking behind it was. Question specifications: eliminate unnecessary labor, accept adequate quality, maximize volume. These principles, applied systematically across entire industries, created American economic dominance for decades. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.